We'll call the meeting of the Minot City Council to order for today. It is Monday, September 20th, 2021 at 5:30 in the afternoon. Would ask that everyone in the audience and at the dais here to go ahead and put your electronic devices on vibrate or on silent so we can keep the distractions down to a minimum. Roll call, please.
Evans.
Here.
Janser.
Here.
Olson.
Here.
Pittner.
Here.
Pajagula.
Here.
Ross.
Here.
And Sitma.
Here. Number 2 is Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Before we get going, I do have to apologize. I'm on the tail end of a cold here. I will try to keep my coughing to a minimum, and hopefully my voice does hold out. I did come back with a negative test, if anybody is wondering. So with that, before we get into our reports here today, I do want to take a moment here to go ahead and identify. We have a Cub Scout troop here from Pack 403, the Burlington, Surrey, and Ned Rose group that are here earning a special badge today. If you want to go ahead and stand up and be recognized for coming out and learning a little bit about our civic and community government. So thank you guys for coming. Do any of the scouts here want to come up and say a few words, or you're good? Okay. Appreciate you guys being here. Number 3 on our agenda today is COVID report and update. We do have 1st District Health Unit here as well as a representative from Trinity Health.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the council. I will be brief and just run through the numbers. Derek, if you want to put those up. See if they come up. There you go. This is the report that we update every day at 1st District. You can select ward out of there, but you'll see that today you had 14 new cases. Typically Monday is a slower day because of the weekend. Active cases today are at 185. Active cases a year ago were 191. So if you remember right, we were above our last year cases, and now we're about even. 14-day positivity rate is 6.8. So vaccinations, the way that chart is showing you is doses to date for all of 1st District, or I'll just go to Ward County. It's 25,402. That's given by all providers. Again, not including the base. So those numbers are not included in here. The way you read the vaccination rates is at least 1 dose, 12 and up. We are now at 48.3%, so we have seen an increase in that age group. The next group is the 18 up, and that is your, well, all of the age groups there. We're at 51.1%, and then the 65 and above are 77.4%. You can see where you are almost mirroring the other 7 county or the other 6 counties. Statewide, the data is current hospitalizations are at 120, current ICU 21, staffed hospital beds, and we can talk a little bit about that number. What that state, the current hospitalizations, they use the North Dakota zip codes for that, so that does not include out-of-state people that are in the hospital. So that number is always a little off. And then new cases since vaccination, we've had 38,000. Unvaccinated cases are 34,746. Breakthrough cases, 3,547. So those are the quick numbers as to where we're sitting right now. Bismarck and the southwest area of the state are the hot spots for cases. They're continuing to see those cases go up. Vaccinations, one thing I have to say for all that will hear is there are not booster doses available yet. Our phones are ringing off the hook with people wanting booster doses. So the way that works is last Friday, there was a subgroup of the FDA that met, and they are making a recommendation for booster doses 65 and older. Now, that subgroup takes that to the full FDA for approval consideration. And then the ACIP meets, which is that is the Board of Practice, Immunization Practices. So they will meet on Wednesday and Thursday of this week. They are the ones that typically, well, they are the ones that determine criteria, rules, decisions, and so forth, how and when people are vaccinated. So once they meet, we should have some more information. Again, this is all in the process. FDA did not approve booster doses for people younger than 65, or that subgroup. So right now it is 65 and older. And you're hearing about the Pfizer. The Pfizer has been approved for the 6 to 11-year-olds. That would be available in October. We don't have the dates or any of that information yet. Again, the ACIP will need to meet and make those determinations. So we are awaiting that information. So with that, I will turn it over to Taylor.
Thank you, if it's okay. Appreciate it. Taylor Wilson, Trinity Hospital. Is that better?
Perfect, thank you.
Sure. So I think you'd asked us to present it on census. Our census at the hospital continues to be very tight. We're seeing COVID cases in line with our ratio, maybe higher than our typical ratio of healthcare relative to the whole state, in the 20 to 25 range. And ebb and flows because we have people coming inbound and outbound outpatients leaving. The MAB is available. So anybody that's positive, please call your provider and ask for that. That's still available. That is about to go on rationing from the federal level. So it'll go to the state, and then we will get our fair share as much as we can. But we still have available, so definitely utilize that if you become positive. What I also want to make sure I communicate is it's flu season. So we are doing a flu clinic. So you'd call 701-857-2515, 2515, to either get a vaccine if you still want to do that you haven't yet, and or getting a flu. We're doing it by appointment this year due to resource, right? Our amount of labor that we have is constrained, just like every other employer in the city and in the state. And so that becomes a factor. We have not restricted our services. We monitor it every day relative to activity, but that's where it is at this time. And I'll stand for any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Any questions at this time?
I have a question for
Alderwoman
Ms.
Evans.
So I just wanted to clarify that for those of us who are immune compromised, we are still able to come in. I went in Friday and got my
Yes.
dose 3. So that category of people is still able to
That's correct.
come to First District. But I was talking to your nurses there, and they said they've had to turn away some people who are coming in and aren't immune compromised. So again, if you and your primary care physician have, discussed that,
Yep.
it's those 3 makes sense for you and your immune compromised.
Yes,
Come on
and
in
thank you
and-
for bringing that up. So, yes, and the severely immune compromised individuals. Again, call for appointments, and thank you for bringing up flu vaccine. Also, we have started that now, and we don't care where you go to get your flu vaccine, just get it. So our hope is that we are making it available to lots of different entities, and it should be available to anybody, any entity or agency or organization that you would feel comfortable with to get your flu vaccination. You can get flu vaccination and COVID vaccination on the same date. So those appointments are to be made too. We, like Trinity, typically, we are on the road and in work sites with flu vaccines, and we are not able to do that this year. We just don't have enough staff. So we're asking people to come to us, make the appointments, and we are encouraging work sites and everybody to find wherever it's most comfortable and available to you to get your flu vaccine. Testing continues to be available Monday through Friday. Call for appointments. It's at First District. We have hired some additional people in there. We are utilizing MSU nurses, but we continue to be tight with the testing. So please call for appointments. So thank you.
And for just verification on this, only because I went and picked one up myself, there are some Binax testing, the quick
Yes.
testing that are available also at some retailers locally, correct?
That is correct. So I don't want to list which retailers because I'm sure I'll forget one or omit one and misstate another. But pharmaceuticals and some of your big box stores may have test kits available too, so check those out.
Any other questions for Ms. Clute or Mr. Wilson?
Mr. Mayor.
Alderman Potagul, and then we'll come over to you.
Thank you. How are we doing in terms of ICU beds and availability of beds for normal people? And also, the second part of that would be, not just physical availability, but in terms of how staff are holding up.
So the physical availability is not a limiting factor in anywhere, to my knowledge, in the state. It's the staffing. And so we have staffing for non-COVID because that's a condition that it's just a sub-condition that we have to take care of the community. So we have capacity in the ICU. It is monitored daily, and it is a precious resource that we monitor and utilize.
So we're still okay?
We're still okay. But if you're in the accepting of request, I would take 100 nurses today.
You're serious?
I am.
Wow. Thank you.
Alderman Ross.
Mr. Wilson, can you talk a little bit about, is there any other types of treatment available for the patients that are coming into the hospital other than the mono?
That
I'm speaking of, like the ivermectin. Is that being approved? Is that being used?
That's not a typical that a medical staff is utilizing and to prove clinical efficiency. So that's not the typical, but each physician would use whatever their clinical judgment is. That's not my role within the health system, but we could ask Dr. Sather to come back and talk to you about the clinical activities.
Thank you. Lisa? Looking at the chart, and thank you for the information here, just a couple of quick questions. Give me your thoughts on looking at where we were a year ago compared to where we are today with having 77.5% vaccinated. We're still at the same level of active cases. Mm-hmm. But to me, that's kind of puzzling.
Yeah.
That we have 77% vaccinated, yet we still got the same amount of people, same amount of active cases.
Well, there's a few things. First of all, the Delta variant is different than what we had last year. The viral load is higher. It's more highly contagious. If you look down on the next part, you can see where some of that is if you look at the age ranges.
Lisa, can you pull the microphone closer to you? Thank you.
Sure. If you look at the ages of the people that are have confirmed cases, we are seeing much younger people. Last year at this time, you saw the bulk of the age group, or in the older age group, middle to older age group. This time, we're seeing it in the much younger age group, which our vaccination rates are much lower in the younger ages. We had a very strong uptake of vaccine in that particularly 60 on up, particularly high in the 70 and older vaccine or age group. And you can see those cases are down, but we are seeing higher numbers in the younger age groups.
One follow-up,
Yep,
Mr. Mayor.
continue.
And if you both want to comment on this, I don't see any of the stats on this chart, but can you talk about where we are at on the survival rate? Have you seen it at the hospital? Is it going up or going down? With this level of vaccination, where do we see the survival rate going?
It's gotten
Trending.
better. As treatments have gotten better, it's gotten better. So that's true. And just for clarity, if you look at the data on her chart, we're not at 77%. We are over 65, but we're in the lower percentage for the general population. One thing that is noteworthy, and she said it, but I want to make sure, especially for our community with the Air Force Base, they have mandated vaccine, so that percentage for that portion of the populace is going to get a lot more vaccine that's not reflected in this data, which will help our community as we continue to go. So we watch the data every day and every week to see, and so we're right now, if we look at it, we're hopeful, but you just don't know until we get the data and we process it every day.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
You bet. Any further questions at this time? Ms. Clute, Mr. Wilson, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. I do have one appointment that is up for consideration this afternoon. It recommended the council confirm Roger Reich to the library board with a term of July 1, 2021 to June 30th of 2024.
So moved.
Motion by Alderman Pittner, second by Alderwoman Olson. Any discussion on the motion? Any discussion? Final call for discussion. Motion is to approve. Please call the roll.
Pittner,
Yes.
Evans,
Yes.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson,
Yes.
Rajagula,
Yes.
Ross,
Yes.
Sitma.
Yes, motion is approved. That takes us to number 5 on our agenda, the city manager's report. Mr. Stewart.
As is typical, there's a city manager memo provided to the council and the public in the packet. Before I take care of any other business, is there any questions with regards to anything covered in the packet?
Any questions for our city
On the memo?
manager? Continue.
All right, just a couple of recognitions. As we've announced publicly, we have a new airport director, as the council approved at the last council meeting. But this also means that tonight is Maria Romanik's last council meeting as our interim airport director, and I wanted to publicly thank her for her efforts and doing a good job of keeping the ship righted and moving forward in a positive manner on behalf of the community and the airport going forward. So I just wanted to publicly thank her for that. I also wanted to state publicly that we've received the resignation of Mr. John Zakian, and this will also be his last council meeting with us in his current capacity. And so I wanted to thank him publicly as well for his efforts. He's had a difficult job here for the last 5 or 6 years, and I think depending on what your personal opinion may be of Mr. Zakian, I think we can all agree that he's had a significant impact on this community, and I believe in a very positive way for this community moving forward. Even though we may not see it yet, as the years go by, we will see the positive impacts of Mr. Zakian and his efforts and his staff. So I wanted to publicly thank him and recognize his last city council meeting here with the city of Minot. I do not have anything else.
Mr. City Manager, before we take any questions or anything further, I'm going to step down here for just a moment to follow up more with that. So, Mr. Zakian, even though that you are a New York Yankees fan, I happen to be a Twins fan. I'm not going to hold that against you. I do want to say also on behalf of the City Council and a large number, if not the entire community, we are very grateful for the time that you've spent here in the Magic City. You came into a program that did not have a director for a number of years, and we had a tremendous amount of work to do in moving the National Disaster Resiliency Program forward to fruition. We would have never anticipated COVID. We would have never anticipated some of the challenges that came with the opportunities. But you certainly met those head on and also got us a very high standing, if not the highest standing out of all of the different grantees within the NDR program in HUD's eyes, which we are very thankful for. So all of the trips that you took back for your personal matters and working while you were on your flights and time away from your family, we're very, very grateful. And if you would, sir, I do have the city coin to present to you this evening as an appreciation for all of the time. It's a very small token of appreciation, but we're so thankful. I'm going to keep it in the wrapper for you, but so very thankful for all of your time that you've given to us and time away from your family. So do you have any parting words?
Very brief.
I can't imagine you not having a few words, John.
Mayor, thank you very much, and City Manager, thank you for the kind comments. It is unfortunately not by choice that I'm leaving. It's no secret. I'm at a certain age where health does become a concern, and it was just becoming a wear and tear. I do hope that in the years to come, it will be found by this entire community that I've left a contribution of a positive, I have to say this, Mayor, resilient growth in our city. I do want to commend all of you sitting up there on the dais. You've had to make some really difficult decisions when it comes to the disaster recovery program and the federal funds. I may not have always shown it, but I had a high regard and respect for your probing questions. I thought they were extremely important. Oftentimes, your questions and your comments and your thoughts were the type of information that HUD really encourages and welcomes to get out into the community. So not only was this a very healthy, deliberative body that made some, what I believe will be lastingly positive, important decisions, but you also did so in a way that promoted transparency and open discussion about all the different options. And again, I'm here for a few more days, and I may still be around to provide some technical assistance. But I do want to thank all of you for the opportunity of serving the city and also serving you.
Thank you, John. Any other items, Mr. City Manager? Okay. We will move on to Section 6 of our agenda this evening, and we do have 6 different items. 3 of those are public hearings, which we will hear individually. What are the wishes of the council? Do we want to take them individually on the remainder items or on consent with recommendations from the Planning Commission?
I'll move consent on the remaining items, Mayor.
A motion to move consent with recommendations from the Planning Commission on 6.1, 6.2, 6.3, and 6.7. I'm sorry, 6.7 in that. And a second by Alderman Ross. As a reminder again to the public and to those folks that are watching at home, these items will be passed with the recommendations that were forwarded on from the Planning Commission. Any discussion on the motion for approval? Any discussion? Final call for discussion. Seeing none, the motion is to approve 6.1, 6.2, 6.3, and 6.7 as recommended by the Planning Commission. Please call the roll.
Pittner,
Yes.
Pagagula,
Yes.
Ross, Sitma,
Yes.
Evans,
Yes.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson,
Yes.
Motion is approved. That takes us to 6.4. This is a public hearing, the Master Block Second Edition, lots 1 and 2. A public hearing to consider a request from Steve Eberly, represented Fred Bentz on behalf of the Fred Bentz Investment LLC to annex into the city limits and approve subdivision to consolidate the 2 lots into one to be known as the Master Block Second Edition. The recommendation, council, is to approve a subdivision to consolidate the 2 lots into one to be known as the Master Block Second Edition and to pass an ordinance to annex the Master Block Second Edition. Again, this is a public hearing for anyone to come speak either in favor, in opposition, or neutral to the recommendations before this council. One more call for a public hearing on the recommendations. Seeing none, what are the wishes of the council? Alderman Pittner.
Mayor, I move that we close the public hearing and approve the item. Staff recommendations.
Motion by Alderman Pittner to close the public hearing and pass the recommendations. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderwoman Olson. Discussion on the motion. Any discussion on the motion? Final call for discussion. Seeing none, the motion is to approve. Please call the roll.
Pittner,
Yes.
Pajagula,
Yes.
Ross,
Yes.
Sitma,
Yes.
Evans,
Yes.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson.
Yes.
Motion is approved. 6.5, another public hearing. This is a zoning map amendment, lots 1 through 20, Bolton Heights, 11th edition. Again, a public hearing to consider a request by Jennifer Cook, representing Luis Cortez, for a zoning map amendment from R1, which is single-family residential district, to R2, two-family residential district, for the purpose of constructing twin homes on lots 1 through 20, Bolton Heights, 11th edition. The recommendations to the council is to pass an ordinance for a zoning map amendment from R1 single-family residential district to R2 two-family residential districts on lots 1 through 20, Bolton Heights, 11th edition. Again, this is a public hearing for anyone to come and speak in favor, in opposition, or neutral to the recommendations before this council. One more call for a public hearing for those who wish to speak on the recommendations. Seeing none, what are the wishes of the council? Alderwoman Olson.
Mr. Mayor, I would move that we close the public hearing and move the item with staff recommendations.
Motion to close the public hearing and move the item on staff recommendations. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderman Ross. Any discussion on the motion? Any discussion? Final call for discussion. Seeing none, motion is to approve. Please call the roll.
Olson,
Yes.
Pittner,
Yes.
Pajagula,
Yes.
Ross,
Yes.
Sitma,
Yes.
Evans,
Yes.
Janser,
Yes.
Motion is approved. Next item is 6.6, another public hearing, Don's second edition. A public hearing to consider a request by 42 Minot LLP on behalf of Jared L. Lochtow for the annexation of a portion of the southeast quarter and southwest quarter of Section 35, Township 156 North, Range 83 West, and a zoning map amendment from Agricultural District to M1 Light Industrial District on the proposed plat to be known as Don's second edition. The four recommendations to the council is to pass an ordinance to annex the portion of the southeast quarter and southwest quarter of Section 35, Township 156 North, Range 83 West into the city limits. 2, pass an ordinance for a zoning map amendment from AG, Agricultural District, to M1 Light Industrial. 3, adopt a resolution for a future land use amendment from the office, business, park, and medium-density residential to industrial. And 4, approve a subdivision of a portion of the southeast quarter and southwest quarter of Section 35, Township 156 North, Range 83 West to be known as Don's second edition. Again, this is a public hearing for anyone to come and speak either in favor, in opposition, or neutral to the recommendations to the council. One more call on the public hearing for comment. Seeing none, what are the wishes of council? Alderwoman Olson.
Mr. Mayor, I would move that we close the public hearing and move the item with staff recommendations.
A motion to close the public hearing and move the item with staff recommendations. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderman Ross. Discussion on the motion. Any discussion? Final call for discussion. Seeing none, the motion is to approve with staff recommendations. Please call the roll.
Olson,
Yes.
Pittner,
Yes.
Pajagula,
Yes.
Ross,
Yes.
Sitma,
Yes.
Evans,
Yes.
Janser.
Yes.
Motion is approved. Mr. Billingsley.
Mayor Sitma, just want to clarify that 6.7 should be listed as a public hearing. It is a text amendment and requires a public hearing before this body.
Okay. Thank you. We will go ahead and take that item individually, although it was passed on consent. 6.7, public hearing. Zoning ordinance text amendment. The recommendation of the City Council was to approve an ordinance on first reading for a zoning text amendment. The proposed change affects tables 5.1 through 6B and table 5.1-6C relating to the sign regulations and sections 9.2-1C relating to the written notice to neighboring property owners. Public hearing for the item that is listed with recommendations. Anyone who wishes to come forward and speak in favor, in opposition, or neutral to the recommendations, please come forward. Second call for comments on the recommendations. Okay, we will vote on this one again. What are the wishes of council?
Mayor, I move that we close the public hearing and approve the item. Staff recommendations.
Motion by Alderman Pinner to close the public hearing and pass with staff recommendations. Second.
Second.
Second by Alderman Ross. Discussion. Any discussion? Mr. City Manager.
If I may, if I'm correct on this implements some requirements in city ordinance that are above and beyond what state law requires in notification on these issues. Am I correct?
There was quite a bit of debate on this in the Planning Commission, so probably a little clarification is in due.
Thank you, Mayor Sitma, City Manager Stewart. It's the first time, I've been here a year, and this would be the first time I get to address this council. Yeah, so our current practice is already above and beyond what the minimum is at state level. So of the 4 other larger communities in North Dakota, we're the only one that presently sends certified mail to neighboring property owners for each public hearing. We've identified that the certified mail process is it's expensive and less efficient than just traditional mail, and we provide sufficient noticing times. We have 3 weeks to get a letter to somebody's address notifying them of the case. And so, yeah, we're still going above and beyond the minimum state requirement of just publishing in the paper twice prior to a public hearing.
So,
Mr. City Manager.
I can follow up on that. I know that we receive a lot of criticism sometimes of not making efforts to be more transparent. And I wanted to point this out as one where if we just do the minimum requirement, we are approving by city ordinance to improve more transparency to the public in this situation and effort to give them opportunities to know when changes are happening and trying to provide good governance as the citizens are requesting. So that's my only point. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. City Manager. Any questions for our principal planner while we have him at the podium? Thank you, sir. Any further discussion? Seeing none, the motion is to approve. Please call the roll.
Pittner,
Yes.
Pajagula,
Yes.
Ross,
Yes.
Sitma,
Yes.
Evans,
Yes.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson.
Yes.
Motion is approved. That is the end of Section 6. Planning Commission. Next section is consent items. We have 18 different items in our consent agenda. I have not had any individual item pulled for individual discussion from the council. For the audience or for the folks that might be watching at home, all items will be passed with recommendations by staff unless there is a single item that needs to be pulled for individual discussion from the audience tonight. Seeing none, I'd look to the council.
Move approval on all of the items.
Motion by Alderwoman Olson to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderman Ross. Discussion on the motion for the consent. Any discussion? Final call for discussion. Motion is to approve all 18 items on consent as recommended by staff. Please call the roll.
Olson,
Yes.
Pittner,
Yes.
Pajagula,
Yes.
Ross,
Yes.
Sitma,
Yes.
Evans, Janser,
Yes.
He did, okay. Motion is approved. That is the end of Section 7. That takes us to the action items, Section 8. Each one of these will be taken individually. 8.1, adopt the 2022 budget ordinance and applicable resolution establishing rates, fees, and charges. The 4 recommendations to council is to recommend the city council place and pass ordinance number 5654 on the second reading to adopt the 2022 annual budget. 2 is recommend the city council adopt a resolution establishing the rates, fees, and charges pertaining to the Minot International Airport. 3, recommend the city council adopt a resolution establishing rates, fees, and charges pertaining to the Rose Hill Memorial Park. And 4, recommend the City Council adopt a resolution establishing rate fees and charges pertaining to sewer.
Move approval.
Motion by Alderwoman Olson to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderwoman Evans. Discussion on the motion. Mr. City Manager.
I just want to let the council know that I did receive a phone call from a citizen today, Mr. and Mrs. Anderson, residing at 913 West Central Avenue, who were opposed to a budget being approved with any increase in taxes.
Thank you for that information. Any further discussion from council? And I would even open this up to the public for comment at this time if there is anyone that does wish to speak on it. Alderwoman Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to note as well that we did have an individual that reached out to many of us on the council. Our city manager took time to meet with him, as did Alderman Janser. He had a number of questions, a number of points that needed to be addressed, and you know, this budget may not meet with his satisfaction, but I do want to thank both of the gentlemen for meeting with him and answering some questions.
Mm-hmm. Alderman Pittner.
Thank you, Mayor. For the sake of consistency, I made my comments and opinions very public at the last meeting. I'll vote no on this for consistency.
Final call for discussion. Motion is to approve. Please call the roll.
Olson,
Yeah, excuse me, yes.
Pittner,
No.
Pajagula,
Yes.
Ross,
Yes.
Sitma,
Yes.
Evans,
Yes.
and Janser.
Yes.
Motion is approved. That takes us to 8.2. This is a public hearing, building relocation request to 5301 Zaharia Drive Southeast, the Mo Move. A public hearing to consider a request to relocate a detached garage from 703 Foxtail Drive, that is 3725 10th Street Southwest, here in Minot, 58701, also known as Lichty Homes 1 Addition Lot 1 to 5301 Zaharia Drive Southeast, here in Minot, 58701, also known as the Cooper Sunrise 2nd Edition, Lot 1, Block 1. The property is surrounded by similar family dwellings as well as a single-story manufactured home. Manufactured homes, plural. The immediate area also contains numerous vacant lots. The homeowner stated that the two-stall, 676-square-foot garage will be placed on a pre-constructed concrete slab. The recommendation to the committee and to the council is to approve the relocation of the detached garage from 703 Foxtail Drive, that is 3725 10th Street Southwest, in Minot, also known as Lichty Homes, at First Edition Lot 1 to 5301 Zaharia Drive Southeast, here in Minot, also known as Cooper Sunrise 2nd Edition Lot 1, Block 1, subject to conditions. This is a public hearing for anyone to come forward and speak either in favor, in opposition, or in neutral to the recommendations before us. I did have Ms. Moe that did reach out to me late this afternoon, as she could not be here because of health conditions, but did say that she would be happy to answer any questions that we may have. I did not have any myself, but that is why she is not present here tonight. Anyone else wish to speak in the public hearing? Seeing none, what are the wishes of the council? Alderman Pittner.
Mayor, I move that we close the public hearing and approve the item with staff conditions.
Motion to close the public hearing and approve the item with staff recommendations. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderman Ross. Any discussion on the motion? Any discussion? Final call for discussion. Seeing none, the motion is to approve with staff recommendations. Please call the roll.
Pittner,
Yes.
Pajagula,
Yes.
Ross,
Yes.
Sitma,
Yes.
Evans,
Yes.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson,
Yes.
Motion is approved. That takes us to item number 8.3. This is the EDA grant project from Visit Minot. We do have our EDA Executive Director, Stephanie Shanerock, who is with us, and rather than read the narrative, I'll let Ms. Shanerock go ahead and give us the details on the other information that is beyond what was provided in our packet. Good evening, Ms. Shanerock.
Good evening, Mayor Sitma and members of council. First of all, I just wanted to say thank you very much for your time tonight. As Mayor Sitma started to talk about, we are here tonight to talk a little bit about an EDA grant and the opportunity, I guess, at hand. So just to kind of summarize to get everybody on the same page, EDA has got a American Rescue Plan Act, and they're essentially giving away, allocating, probably is a better word, $3 billion. Of that, there is a component, the travel, tourism, and outdoor recreation amount is $240 million that is dedicated for those type of projects. Obviously, there's an unprecedented amount of money getting distributed. So we have spent a lot of time on webinars, training webinars, to find out what Visit Minot can do to absolutely give us the best shot at getting some of these federal dollars to our community. So aside from the webinars and talking to people who work on grants all the time, on these exact kind of grants, we've customized a program that will give us the best shot at getting a piece of that money. What they have told us, and I'm understanding there's a keyboard somewhere where I'm supposed to use a mouse. This isn't a candid camera thing, right? There it is. So if I just push the button, that goes? What do you know? Okay, no.
Perhaps the other, there you go.
Ah, there we go. The magic one comes up. Thank you for that. All right. So back to the training. So what we've learned, because throughout all of it, the common thread of what we were told was the early bird gets the worm. Get on this as soon as possible. You may remember a year ago, we had went after another EDA grant and put everything together and then realized they ran out of money. Well, that was a tough lesson to learn, but that is why we are hitting the ground as hard as we can and as quick as we can right now. So what you see on the screen is the Travel, Tourism, and Outdoor Recreation. That's the name of this grant, essentially. The focus of this is new and expanded infrastructure. This is the thing on there you'll see the 8 different types of projects. The thing with what we've learned is that you have to have one of these 8 types in order to get their money, in order to have a chance at getting some EDA dollars, federal dollars for us. Our project, and I'll get into the details in a minute, but our project addresses 6 of the 8. And that isn't by chance. It is customized and built, I guess I would say, for this particular project. So step 1 is what I'm calling, I guess, the Startup Studio. EDA, and again, back to customizing this program to what EDA likes. There's going to be 4 components to the Startup Studio, and those are the 4 points that you see there. Number 1 is retail. They really like the possibility of, say, somebody wanted to open up a candle making shop in downtown Minot. Rather than investing $500,000 or whatever the number is on space and product and whatever, they could come into Visit Minot's expanded retail space and test their product in our space. That's pop-up. They could also, if they didn't want to have enough, they could also do a shelf rental. Another one is small meeting space. One thing we've learned in the past year is that there's a tremendous amount of groups, organizations, sporting groups, whatever, that need, oftentimes, the example I'm thinking of is Magic City Youth Baseball. They're a youth, a volunteer group. They meet in the evenings. They don't have a place to meet. They could come in and actually use our space. This is the part that I haven't mentioned yet, but this Startup Studio that we're calling, it would accommodate, you'd be able to use it if you're in the hospitality industry. And again, the hospitality industry is restaurants, retail, events, attractions, hotels. The hospitality industry is far more than hotels. It's really anybody that caters to people who are coming in from outside of Ward County. So that is who this Startup Studio is intended to work with. Third component, back to the components of the Startup Studio, the third component is co-working space. We would have an office available. And the fourth one is what is considered a hot desk with equipment. I'm going to go back to the Magic City Youth Baseball example. If, for instance, at the board meeting, they want to come in, use the desk and put together their flyer or banner or whatever and print it out there, all of those tools would be at their disposal in one spot. The reason that EDA likes this model is essentially it provides the tools to get these new businesses, expanded businesses, whatever, organizations, events on their feet. It's meant to help give them, I guess, a hand up. So that's component number one, Startup Studio, and that's truly the reason that I'm here tonight. There is another component to this. The other component to that is an outdoor recreation area. As you probably noticed in the name of it, the name of this grant is Travel, Tourism, and Outdoor Recreation. It is an absolute focus, I guess, of EDA. So the thing about the outdoor recreation area is we're not looking for any support tonight in that area. The reason I'm here is to show you that we're taking the lead at going after this grant. And essentially, it's a $3 to $4 million grant application. That's an estimation at this point. As I mentioned before, there's a lot of moving parts. We won't know for another week and a half about what that exact dollar figure is, but knowing we needed to have something. So our grant application is going to be between $3 and $4 million. Wow. The part for the Startup Studio is, I think, 1.3 million. There is a 20% contingency in there, but regardless. This is the reason I'm here tonight. In order to submit the application, we are required to have a match. And so we are asking for a $200,000 requested, it's basically a letter of commitment, and that's what you have in your packet, in your council packet, I believe. And so essentially we are asking for $200,000 as a letter of commitment that we can provide with this application that needs to be in the next 3 weeks in order for our community to get between $3 and $4 million. The other component to this that I want to mention that is really important to EDA, I've mentioned a couple components. The other component that's really important to EDA is workforce development, and that's another part that we're talking about here. When we're talking about connecting or bringing entrepreneurs in the Startup Studio, we're working with the director at the Severson Entrepreneurship Academy at Minot State, and we will actually be partnering with them as well to help develop workforce. And so, like I said at the beginning, this entire program is a custom-built program to make EDA as happy as we possibly can, to give us our best shot at bringing some of these dollars to our community.
Thank you, Ms. Shanerock. One of the questions that when I was made aware of this initially came to mind, looking at economic development and the percentage of the 1 penny that we have dedicated towards economic development, and the constraints and time frame that we were working with didn't lend towards the typical avenue of looking to either the Magic Fund or the typical, let's call it, avenues, which is even with my recommendation on why we are looking at this consideration tonight as a letter of commitment, given our constraints of time. So with that, I would look to any of the aldermen or alderwomen if you have any questions for Ms. Shanerock.
Oh, I have a question for Mr. Lakefield. Sorry.
Yes, Alderwoman Evans.
I have a question for Mr. Lakefield. But don't go anywhere, Stephanie, because I'm sure we have questions for you. So tell us where you think, like, if we were to commit to this, where would you envision that match coming from?
Mr. Mayor, Alderwoman Evans, I think our discussions to this point would be to use sales tax economic development funds that were allocated for city economic development activities that haven't already been budgeted.
So that would be, aside from, I think a few months ago, we had done that allotment for Mr. Rosenthal and like the facade improvement and stuff. This would be separate from that.
Mr. Mayor, Alderwoman Evans, that would be correct. And we
Okay.
wouldn't anticipate that this funding would be expended until 2022. So it would require a budget amendment to appropriate the funds from the sales tax economic development.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dave. I appreciate that.
Any other questions for Dave while he's here?
Oh, not for Dave.
Okay. Alderman Ross for Machine Rock.
Yes. Thank you, Stephanie, for the presentation. Going into I guess the first question after listening to this and reading this is, what's the mission of Visit Minot? What's your mission?
Our mission is to draw more people from outside of Ward County into Ward County to support the hospitality industry, which is, again, more than hotels.
Have you approached MADC, and I know the mayor mentioned it, but have you approached MADC or EDC on this proposal?
Mayor Sitman, Alderman Ross, I have not. I haven't seen the need up to this point, or the time, I should say.
Have any other government entities been asked for supporting dollars? Ward County, Park District, have anybody else, have those entities been asked for any dollars?
Mayor Sitman,
Commitment dollars.
Alderman Ross, I don't know what others are asking for. I guess I'm not sure how we know that. As far as I know, and I've talked to the organizations that work with these, they are not aware of other organizations that are going after this, but I don't know that I would know that with a complete certainty.
Just one moment here, Mr. City Manager.
For point of clarification, I think what the question that Alderman Ross is asking is, you're asking us to pay $200,000 in match. Have you approached any of the other taxing entities like Ward County or the Parks District to help fund the local match requirement? But my understanding is, she talked about one part of this. There is another part with recreation that I believe the Parks Department is discussing the match for that element, if I'm correct.
Mayor Sitma and City Manager, yes, that is correct. That is for tomorrow evening, and truthfully, that's a completely separate part that we are not asking for. So I haven't dove into that a lot tonight. But thank you for clarifying that question, if that in fact is the question. I've started conversations with a couple other entities, truly. It is a little bit like we're feeling like we're in a race, because the longer we wait, the less of a shot we have at getting this. When we looked at, okay, where can we get this from? It was like, at this point, we're looking for a letter of commitment. And so that's where the conversations started. It was last week that I met with Mayor Sitma and the city manager. And that's when they said, you know what, I think we should come here to start the discussions. The deal is that we can spend a whole lot more time in planning, or we can get to work and get this application submitted. And so that's where our focus has been, is, okay, you know what, there is 42 pieces to this puzzle that need to come together in order for this grant application to be successful. And this is one of those pieces. And so the more time we spend on this one piece, the less time we have to spend on the rest, which means the further it gets pushed out. So it's really come down to where we've chosen to put our priority of time, because essentially our time is the currency in this case.
Alderman Ross.
When you talk about, can you give more specifics on the workforce development portion of this, and how Minot State's involved, and what's going to be immeasurable coming out of that?
Mayor Sitma and Alderman Ross, you know what? This is what we know at this point. EDA isn't requiring us to write down what the measurable is going to be, and they're the one paying the 80% of the bill. So what we know from that is that I've been in conversations with the director of the Severson Entrepreneurship Academy and kicked around ideas of how we can make this work. whether that means, okay, we'll have 2 interns that are, one is managing the new retail space, and they double as kind of our marketing intern. We've kicked around a lot of different scenarios of what that looks like. But again, it kind of goes back to the pieces to the puzzle piece, where it's like, okay, what do we need to do in order to get this, to appease EDA? I don't have all the answers of how this would exactly all be fleshed out. EDA doesn't want it, and so we haven't spent time doing that part of it, confident that if the federal government's willing to give us that money, let's not sit around, I don't know that I will say wasting time, because it would be time well, it all has to be done at some point, certainly. It absolutely does. We're just prioritizing our time right now.
Final question, but the head, now just, I mean, confirm the head of the Sievertson School, he also sits on your board too, right?
Mayor Sitman, Alderman Ross, yes, that is correct.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Shane Rock? Mr. City Manager.
Just to be clear here, for the sake of the public and for the council, in essence, what is being asked for now is applying for a grant that's going to basically do an addition onto the current Scandinavian heritage area.
Yes.
Of adding additional square foot that allows space for these types of uses. So you will have a brick and mortar cost of adding an addition onto our current facility. And if I understand, maybe even some potential infrastructure investment within our current facility in a way that maintains the aesthetic integrity of the Scandinavian heritage area. And that also increases some of the cost with regards to the project, because when you have the number 1, number 2 tourism destination in the state of North Dakota, depending on what tracker you're looking at, due to its Scandinavian look and heritage, we're looking at adding some additional space, but then tying that in so that aesthetically it does not detract or take away from that draw to our community as well. I just wanted to be clear that, I mean, we talked about programs and how this additional space would be used, but I don't know that we've made it clear to the public that we're looking at a square foot addition to the facility. That will be a brick and mortar addition, and that's what the bulk of this money is going towards.
Further questions? Alderman Patagula.
Just a comment. I can't read Tom's mind, but I think I have some concerns like his. My major concern, well, I guess 2 concerns. One is this issue of it being an ad hoc kind of effort. And I understand that nobody planned on COVID, nobody planned on the federal government having enormous amounts of money that they're apparently giving away, partly our money, but giving away to all sorts of entities, and this gives us a chance to do all sorts of things. But the ad hoc nature of it concerns me a little bit. You know, if someone's going to give you $4 million and they're asking for $200,000, that seems like a reasonable investment. But it would be nicer for me if we're part of a plan. If Visit Minot came in and with the park board and, you know, maybe a part of our strategic planning process, and we sat down and thought, gee, what kinds of things do we need to invest in? And maybe one of them being an expansion of this facility. I felt that Visit Minot has been underfunded historically. We haven't invested the kinds of funds in it that I think we need to. And it isn't just to support the hospitality industry. I see it as an important part of our cultural and economic livelihood, bringing in new people, bringing in ideas, bringing in dollars, bringing in a lot of things, a lot of it being, I think, acquaintance with the community, learning about Minot, and maybe later on, years from now, moving here or investing here or whatever. But I'm a little concerned that in my eyes, it doesn't seem like we have a comprehensive plan kind of going into the future. These are the kinds of things we're investing in. This is where we see our future in terms of economics and visiting and things like that. So the ad hoc nature troubles me a little bit. Now, again, I understand that, you know, nobody predicted this, nobody wanted this. And if it's there, you know, probably should take advantage of it. The other concern, I think, is something that Tom specifically mentioned, is this notion of how are we going to find out if the money is working. And that's a long-term concern of mine. I don't think we necessarily have to be so specific with some activities like, 14.6 new jobs like we are with Magic Fund within a certain number of years. I think this is a different kind of investment. It's a longer-term investment. It's a more speculative kind of investment. I'm not asking for that kind of specificity, but I think, at the end of the day, a year, 2 years, 5 years from now, I think we need to be able to answer the question of, has this worked? How has it worked? And how can it be made more effective in the future? Maybe 200,000 is just an initial investment. Maybe we need to be investing 5 times that or 4 times that, or maybe it's a dead end. So that's one of the things I'm concerned about. I don't mean to pick on you in this specific proposal for that, but that's something that troubles me a lot about public kinds of investments. We have an idea, we set up a project. But how do we know if it works? In the private sector, becomes profitable or it doesn't. I mean, that's one very quick way of measuring it. And we all know that private enterprise sometimes continues to be non-profitable, but they do it as a matter of values or a matter of choice. Or if you're wealthy, you're Mr. What's his name, the guy who went to space, he can spend his money how he wants. Yeah. But Bezos, I believe it is. But there's that part of me that is looking for more accountability. And again, I'm not looking for, the second decimal point. Yeah. But how do we know if this is working? So those are the things that make me pause a little bit. And I think one of them, Tom has mentioned this notion of accountability. He's mentioned it before. How do we know if it's working? How would we measure this? Now, again, not everything can be measured in a quantitative way. Sometimes the measurement is, the leaders of the community sit and we reflect and we think, yeah, this was worth it. But I think there has to be that component to it. So those are the 2 reservations I have. I'll most likely support it, but a little concerned. I also want to ask you to ignore my phone message to you from earlier this afternoon. I called to ask where the money was coming from, and Carrie asked, and Dave answered very nicely where the money would be coming from. So I'm satisfied. So don't bother returning my phone call. Thank you.
Ms. Shanrock.
Mayor Sitmak, if I may, I would like to, I think, Alderman Ross and Alderman Padragula bring up a really valid point regarding accountability, and I'd like to address that if that's okay.
Absolutely. If you want to pull the mic down just a little bit.
Absolutely. I've got a loud voice, so that usually is no problem for me. Okay, so yeah, you know what? You guys bring up a really great subject, and I don't know that tonight's the night for me to go all the way down that can of worms, but I would love to talk about it because the chemistry of Visit Minot continues to change. It has shifted significantly in the past year, and it will continue. So this is what I can tell you about accountability, and that is that we're tracking far more metrics than we ever had before. Literally at 3 o'clock today, I had a phone call with the company that we've been working with for a few months now. I asked them to create a new simple word, a chart for me. So what we're doing is we're tracking credit card spend from people outside of Ward County. And at 3 o'clock today, they gave me the beta. I went in, I looked, they realized they needed to make an adjustment. So my point of telling you that is originally I was like, man, I would really like to bring that here. Because they needed to make an adjustment to it already, I didn't feel comfortable bringing it here tonight until I knew completely that what I was looking at was accurate. So that is one way that I would like to tell you that we are being accountable or trying to be accountable, striving to be as accountable as we possibly can be. Back to the chemistry of Visit Minot, the entire point of what we are doing is to move the needle and to be accountable and to show it. That's the reason we're there. It was interesting to look at these numbers and the trend lines over the past 3 years that shows credit card spend from people outside of Ward County in Ward County. And I can move the number to show, okay, this is what it looks like when including the people in Ward County. But honestly, as I mentioned a year ago when I came to you folks to the council the first time, Visit Minot's the entire goal of tourism is to go after the good money. And to just as a recap of what that means, the good money in tourism is money from people outside the area. In tourism, good money is people who come here and drop their money and then go home. Bad money is when we go to another community and spend the weekend and drop our money there. Neutral money is all of us who live here, who spend our money here, right? So our focus, and possibly a better way of answering your question, Alderman Ross, is to say, our mission is to go after as much good money as possible, more and more all the time. And so that is one way that we like to track it. There's a number of ways that we're trying to move that needle. We're not going after just one thing. Like, you know, we have a big focus on sports right now, but we can't put all of our eggs in that basket. We have to put them in lots of baskets. So that's what we're trying to do.
Ms. Shane Rock and the council, perhaps specific to the $200,000 when we talk about accountability, the same way that when we worked the facade program, through that there is metrics that we're tracking on that. So if we're talking about spending $200,000 to get a little more than $1 million, one of those metrics, of course, if we're talking about a renovation, is an area that would be pop-up or retail space. Metrics that Visit Minot, as I said on the board a while ago, already is tracking. And as they expand that area, that would be one of the metrics that we would be able to use old data versus new data on how that expenditure is paying off. One of the other metrics would also be the usage space from the community boardroom, gathering room, whatever it is quantified at, is how well that is being used as a metric by a number of different organizations within the community. Garnering off the $200,000 that was identified a number of budgets ago was specific in a gap-filling method for small and existing business. And this $200,000 not only does that for small and existing business, has metrics that can be tracked, but then also provides another added benefit in terms of space that can be better or maybe more utilized for not only organizations within the community, but even the office space for that small and existing business in that gap-filling process that was identified. That is how I see the metrics that can be attributed to this. And ironically, it's metrics that are already being tracked, with the exception of the space that doesn't exist right now.
Right.
Any other questions? That was not a question. Any questions for Ms. Shane Rock? Alderwoman Evans.
Can you go back to the previous? That one, yes.
Oh, sorry, yes.
So, you know, one of the things I feel like Minot is lacking that I notice is like having this kind of small meeting space. I work for a nonprofit. We're always fighting for meeting space. You know, the library is often booked far ahead in advance. You know, there's not a lot of space for, you know, like you said, little organizations to meet. The co-working space is gonna, you know, in November of 2020, you know, the governor officially like declared telework as a state policy. So we have many of our agencies, Department of Civil Rights, for instance, which is almost exclusively now people working remotely. And Cognizant, one of our big companies here, went completely remote. So I think the past 12 months has shown like this huge like burst of remote workers in around the country. But, you know, Minot has a lot of remote workers that, you know, could benefit from a co-working space. I know this is just a start, like a one office, but I think, you know, I would love to have co-working space, you know, for those times when you're just, you know, and so I think, you know, I've talked to Cognizant employees that, you know, say, oh my goodness, I would love to have that just to get out of the house, you know, one day a week, our state workers. So I think, you know, there's definitely a need for this kind of thing, and all of these things, like the mayor said, are measurable, right? How many people are using that co-working space? And as Alderman Padragula said, we may see like, holy cow, like we need 10,000 square feet of co-working space. Like this is a big need in Minot. So I think this is a good sort of start to assessing, is this, you know, something that is going to help the economic development and the employees too, and the nonprofits and other entities that would use this space. So I like it.
Thank you.
Questions for Ms. Shane Rock? Thank you, Stephanie. We do not have a motion on the floor yet at this time. The recommendation to council is to allow the mayor to sign a letter provided to, that is provided in the packet to allow to move the grant process forward.
Move approval.
Motion by Alderman Pittner to approve, second by Alderwoman Olson. Further discussion on the motion. Alderman Ross.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wrote some notes down during the presentation and listening to the answers to the question, and I do have some concerns. And, the first sentence that came up was, or the first question or concern is it just sounds like we're doing a project to have a project. And I don't know, I really find it hard to see, I don't know if there's a need for the retail space, the meeting space. I personally don't see it. You hear the meeting space, retail space, workforce development, the entrepreneurship. It seems like they want to be in economic development. This seems like stuff for our economic development entities that we have in this community. And, it's, to me, a thought that came to mind, that's why we don't have the fire department out patrolling the streets for speeding or running stop signs. It's the same reason why we don't have, public works fighting fires. It's to me, it kind of stay in your lane, and I just don't see where this project fits the mission of bringing people in from Minot. The people from Renville County, people from Bottineau County, people from outside of Ward County, I don't think are going to come here to meet. I don't think, so it just, to me, I can't support this simply because I just got a feeling that it's just, we're doing this, it's just a project for a project need. There hasn't been a lot of thought put into this, and it just, that's where I stand on it. Thank you.
Alderman Pittner.
Thank you, Mayor. Define economic development. What is it? Is it bringing people to Minot? Is it getting businesses to relocate here? There is no clear-cut answer to what economic development is. This is a project that's on our agenda, that's before us. There's no other economic development partner at the table. And what are the measurables? Again, we can measure some of these things, but some of them are tertiary. Some of the things that that Visit Minot is already doing, giving our partners, our community partners, the tools to be successful, so that we can bring more events in and advertise that we have a meeting space, we have an office space for to use where you can have your board meetings, have your coaches meetings, have your administrative meetings. We're making an organization, a community partner, stronger for our community. We're investing in our people. Outside of what we approved a few months back with the tourism resiliency, we haven't really invested in Visit Minot. We give, I believe it's a 2% lodging tax by ordinance, but that's really the only investment we've made into them and into that organization. Yes, I sit on the board, and I'll be honest with you, Tom, and I'm privy to this because I sit on that board. There has been a lot of thought given into this. This has been a very laboring process to get to this point. The problem is, we work at the speed of government sometimes when it's the EDA and getting some of these grants posted and going through the process of coming up with a concise plan. We don't want to come in half-hearted. But again, this is an investment into a community partner that is trying to move the needle, that is moving the needle for us, that is tracking things that have never been tracked in our community before, with credit card spending, with geofencing, with some of the things that are innovative beyond any other thing that the city has done in the past. They are a great community partner. I'm willing to invest in our community partner. They are the center for Visitors Bureau. They're the center of bringing people to Minot. And I think this only lends not only to what the vision of this project is, but also to the vision that currently exists with Visit Minot and brings them forward and makes those existing priorities and their existing vision that much stronger. I'll support this wholeheartedly. This is a once in a lifetime. This is a generational opportunity as far as funds available to the federal government. This is 5% match to a $3 to $4 million project that will make our community stronger and more resilient. So again, I will support this. I appreciate all of the work that's gone into getting it to this point, whether it be from staff or other board members on Visit Minot. It has been very, very stressful, and again, I'll support this wholeheartedly. This is an investment into our community and into our community partners that are doing the work to make this community better. So,
Alderwoman Olson.
Excuse me, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I see a lot of similarities between this and the resiliency grant that we received a number of years ago. As we went into the thinking process for the resiliency grant, we had to come up with ideas on a pretty rapid rate of things that could improve our community, that would prove us to be resilient for decades to come. And there was some pushback at that time. There were people saying, this hasn't been vetted out enough. This isn't something that was needed. We haven't talked about this. But the process was fast because the federal government was at the wheel at that point, just as they are now. I can see this being a really good investment for our community. I mean, $200,000 seems like a lot of money, but the benefit that we could get between $3 and $4 million for Visit Minot, it just makes sense. I think if a financial planner offered me that deal, I would take it in a heartbeat. So I will support this as well and hope that the efforts that are being put forth by Ms. Shanerock and Visit Minot are successful and that they are allotted that grant.
One of the aspects that I didn't touch on when I made my comments about the measurables, one aspect that I'm very aware of, when tens of thousands of people come through the visitor center every summer, and some, yes, during the winter, they're looking for North Dakota, Pride of Dakota type of merchandise. Some time ago, we lost our Pride of Dakota store here in town. And what I see with people that shop at places like Visit Minot or the Heritage Center or the Peace Gardens, they're looking for that little niche of North Dakota as they're passing through. What we see in our Pride of Dakota vendors, and we do have quite a few of them that not only live in Minot, but throughout the region, would be able to actually provide yet maybe a little more access to those folks and exposure for their products, and maybe that testing ground on whether or not it's enough for them to rent out retail space downtown or at the mall or wherever it is. So I think it's double exposure. It's double exposure not only for some of our vendors locally who have that homemade North Dakota type niche that so many people are looking for, that I see a lot of folks from Minot Air Force Base looking for as they're taking their parting gifts, but the tourists as well. And then also the just exposure for them to explore whether or not they've got enough of a demand on their product to take that bigger step into the business, whether it's leasing space, wherever. So I am going to support it. I see a very big benefit just in that aspect alone. The renovation and the meeting space, I think, is just icing on the cake for that type of investment. Alderman Pittner, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just have a quick question for Mrs. Shanerock again. Steph, what is the name of this grant and what portion are we applying for?
I will pull that exact, oops, or not. The exact name of the grant is the Travel, Tourism, and Outdoor Recreation. So this is the American Rescue Plan Act by EDA, Economic Development Association. And Economic Development Association has set aside $240 million dedicated for travel, tourism, and outdoor recreation.
And these are EDA's words, not yours?
Mayor Sitma and Alderman Pittner, these are definitely not my words. I actually wrote it down, so I made sure I got the exact name correct.
Okay.
Correct.
That's my question, and my point being, this is Visit Minot's lane, tourism, the Minot Center for Visitors Bureau. This is their lane. This This money is allocated to organizations like this, making investments in communities for these types of projects. So I just want to make sure that that's clear, that we're not out of line. Minot CVB and Visit Minot is not out of line in applying for economic development in this sense or in this fashion. This is what this organization is supposed to be doing.
Mr. City Manager.
Just a couple of points here. One is that you have two letters in front of you tonight that you're considering. One is a general letter of support of commitment, as is typical with most grant applications, that we're all on board with this. And the second one would be the $200,000 commitment. I do want to say that this is just a commitment letter. There will still be future action of the council. This will require a budget amendment at some point in the future because this is not currently built into our budget. But I just wanted to make that point of process clear for the council and the public.
Further discussion on the motion? Last call for discussion. Motion is to approve. Please call the roll.
Pittner,
Yes.
Pajagula,
Yes.
Ross,
Nope.
Sitma,
Yes.
Evans,
Yes.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson.
Yes.
Motion is approved. That takes us to item 8.4, adopt a policy for the sale of retail liquor licenses. The total number of available retail liquor licenses granted by the City of Minot is limited by the city's population in Section 5-16 of the City of Minot Code of Ordinances. The official 2020 United States Census determined that the City of Minot's population is 48,377 residents, meaning the city can issue 32 total retail liquor licenses. City currently has 28 retail liquor licenses in operation, so the City Council, in its sole discretion, may award 4 additional licenses. The recommendation of the City Council is to adopt a policy to conduct the sale of retail liquor licenses, approve and advertise and bid specifications, and authorize staff to award the licenses to the highest qualified bidders.
Mr. Mayor, I move approval.
Alderwoman Olson, or Alderwoman Evans was,
That wasn't my motion.
okay. Alderman Ross makes a motion to approve. Is there a second? Alderwoman Olson on a second. Discussion. Alderman Patagula.
Yeah, I had some questions, and I apologize if these seem naive, but I don't go to bars, don't drink a whole lot. This is kind of a foreign world to me, and a couple of you have some real expertise here. So that's what I'm asking for, specifically from you, Mayor, and specifically from you, Mr. City Manager. I have 3 questions, basically. First of all, it's a very technical, small one. Are there limits in terms of numbers of liquor licenses in state law? I know we have in ordinances, we do, but in terms of population, that's the first basic question. The second question I have, it becomes more theoretical here. I'd be interested in the rationale for limiting the number of liquor licenses. And the third question is, if for some reason we decide to open it up beyond 4, are there ways of treating equitably the people who've already invested tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in a license? And to help you understand why I'm asking these questions, where I'm coming from, is this seems like one of those things where I have a hard time explaining and justifying, and that's why I'm asking for an explanation. I'm sure there are many out there, why the city would arbitrarily limit the number of a certain kind of business. I can see charging a license fee because there are costs in terms of compliance, in terms of increased law enforcement, in terms of keeping unsavory elements out of the liquor business and things like that. But when I'm thinking about, economic development, one of the things people always come up with in air-based retention, things like that, is, doing away with arbitrary and artificial barriers to professional practice, to opening up businesses, to things like that. And I've never understood why we do that and what the rationale for it is. So my vote on this will depend on a broader understanding of the issue. And, I'm almost wondering, if there is a possibility of even looking at expanding it beyond 4. I know we would have to change the city ordinance, and that's why I ask if there's a state law that controls. Part of the reason, too, I mention this is beyond my own curiosity, is that we've been approached by a representative from a downtown association, asking us to hold this for a while to see if there could be some creative alternatives, in particular looking at facilitating the development of a business downtown that might use liquor license as a way of financing. So if the two of you, or anybody else for that matter, has answers to these questions, I'd appreciate it. Are there limits in state law? What is the rationale for limiting the number of liquor licenses? We don't limit the number of muffler shops or psychologist's office or whatever. Why do we limit the number of liquor establishments? And the third thing is so those would be the two main questions.
Alderman Patagula, sitting through the 2016 liquor license review, the short answer, and Kelly, please correct me at any time if I misspeak here, is no, the state does not have any kind of limitations. We do set that with our own ordinances. From what I can gather, and this is a little bit assumptive, but this dates actually back to the time when North Dakota came out of Prohibition, on where some of our limitations or where some of our original laws came from on these controlled substance licenses. And I think that that's where the original idea came from in discussions back in 2016. Now, in terms of what would prevent us from just saying we're going to issue as many as we want, this was the big discussion back in 2016 because the climate, economic climate was much different, I think, within the bars and or restaurants that held these licenses. Some of those licenses at that time were selling to $300,000 to $400,000 each, transfer private person to private person. So in a sense, when the city, and it's not just Minot, but just about every city major city in North Dakota has their own variation of either limitations or requirements. So in essence, though, years and years, decades and decades ago, when the city created a limitation, it in essence created a value on that property. So what we ran into in 2016, if we were going to say we're just going to issue as many licenses as we want, is how equitably do we then have the inverse condemnation of that created property by opening more of them up for anyone to come and take. That really was the crux of the issue that we dealt with in 2016 on there are limitations, there is a value associated with that. If we take away that value by just adding more licenses, is that an inverse condemnation of real property or tangible property? I don't even know what the legal term on that would be. So in 2016, that's where we came to the conclusion that the modifications that were made is that, one, we were going to track the licenses in terms of the sale. So each transfer of that license from property owner to property owner was then going to be tracked in terms of that dollar value. What we saw moving forward from 2016 is that value of those licenses really reduced down to, in some cases, $100,000 or transfer among, I think, co-partners in their own entity at a zero value in that state. So what we were trying to gather is what are these licenses really worth? When we came to the 2020 census then, in a determination of is this going to be something that we want to continue down the path on, are we going to continue have these limitations? And if not, how do we deal with the valuations of those licenses to all of those holders that now have them? Looking at some of the other cities, and time has fogged me a little bit on how Bismarck, Grand Forks, and Fargo handle all of theirs. Bismarck, Fargo, and Grand Forks handle theirs. Each one of them has a different mechanism for the limitations or requirements on them, but each one of them does have values that are handled differently. So I would look to our city attorney maybe if there's any further clarification on really the crux of what we tasked in 2016 and where we're at today with this.
Mr. Mayor, I think you covered it pretty well. State law has a state liquor retail alcohol license, and that's the only category of license that the state has. They also require each individual or entity who sells alcohol to have a local license too. So cities and counties have local ordinances in place that separately categorize the type of license that's required to sell alcohol in the city. I believe our limitation on retail liquor licenses and also the retail beer and wine licenses, there used to be a limitation on those licenses as well, was put into place in the 80s. At that time, the ordinance was also modified to, as the mayor indicated, specifically say that a person who owns a license has a property interest in that license and can sell it, transfer it, and do all those types of things, which is where we run into the problem of just trying to eliminate that limitation because there is some value to the liquor license because of the cap. Other cities, since we have talked about this in 2016, have looked at removing their caps. There's a number of other cities in North Dakota who have limitations on the number of licenses that they have. Grand Forks does not have a cap on their liquor licenses, but I believe most of the other cities do. I think Bismarck and Dickinson both looked at removing their caps on liquor licenses. They reviewed some options in how they could do that with people who currently hold the licenses. And I think there were some considerations, if I remember right, like not waiving a license fee for a number of years. Maybe there was some transferability that they were allowed to have with those. I can't remember all the details, but they never actually went down the road of removing their caps as far as I'm aware. And why those things were put into place, I think it was probably an issue of morale at that time, I'm guessing, or moral types of circumstances. I don't know all the details, though, because that would have been before my time.
Mr. City Manager.
Yeah, I think Mr. Mayor and the city attorney have done a good job of summarizing Minot's approach to this and its history. To speak more generally, to answer Alderman Padragula's question of why communities would have these types of restrictions in place, and the city attorney has alluded to it. It wasn't uncommon years ago in American culture that values were very much incorporated into local ordinance. So this is an issue of local control. It reflects the culture and the character of the community. Just as each of us individually up here on this dais or in this room have different characters and personalities, each community has its own mix and makeup that overall becomes its character and its identity. And those values are incorporated within ordinance. So, for example, it wasn't uncommon too long ago that cities regulated operational hours of businesses within their communities by not allowing them to be open on Sundays, because Sundays was a religious observance day, and it was not culturally or morally acceptable to allow businesses to operate on a religious day. Now, over time, culture and character has shifted, values have changed, and we've seen that with regards to, more businesses are open on Sundays, the mail even gets delivered on Sundays now sometimes, those types of things that were considered unacceptable in the past are now acceptable in our current culture and society. And as such, you as the council you represent the values and the character of the community and how that is reflected within our ordinances. So you're not off point with asking, is this still a value of our community? Should we still continue to regulate this as tightly as was done previously by previous councils and administrations? Or is it time for this to change? Now, that being said, again, I think the mayor and the city attorney have duly noted that there may be some challenges of completely lifting the restriction on, have you in effect created a property right of value, and are you diminishing that by changing that and making it open? I can tell you that for me, it is uncommon to have liquor licenses limited to a specific number. Everywhere else I've been, in some cases, the states haven't even given the local control. Basically, if you meet the requirements, you get a state license and you can operate as long as you meet the local zoning ordinances of the community. But there was no restriction on the number of licenses, and I definitely haven't seen licenses being sold at the amounts that are being sold for here in North Dakota. But that's North Dakota culture, values. That's also Minot culture and values. But I think you bring up a good point of assessing whether or not those values have changed and whether or not those need to adapt as reflected in ordinance.
One final point, Alderman Padragula, the two that I think is noteworthy of bringing up from the 2016 discussions is that through that time, it was myself and another, I think, alderman that met with all of the bar owners for consecutive meetings to take input from them. And many of them made the argument that there was one substantial investment in that license already, too, that in many cases that license was more valuable than their business in terms of saleability. And in many other forms, it was kind of their retirement of getting out of the business. And many of them also made the argument directly, and not even beating around the bush, that if we were to innately take that property away from them and devalue it, that there was going to be a consortium of litigation. And not to say that the threat of litigation is enough to back away from everything, but that was also a very contentious point during those discussions.
Just a quick
Continue.
follow-up on that. I'm not asking for an answer tonight, but if this is one of those times where your experience as a city manager, Harold, and your formal education can be very valuable to me at least. If you could come up with some, if some survey or some look at maybe a law review article or something, if somebody's come up with any clever ways of dealing with this loss of property rights, because that is a major issue. If you paid a couple $100,000 for something and then we take it away, or when we think about taking it away, that is a huge problem for me. But I can't help but think that somewhere somebody has come up with some models for addressing that. If either of you could find something, again, forward to me, I'd really like to see it, because there's got to be a solution for this. You know, it's not fair if someone's made that kind of investment to take it out from them, pull the carpet out from under them. But on the other hand, this raises a whole lot of issues that we're arbitrarily limiting the number of kinds of business. I mean, it's one of the great things about the free enterprise capitalist system. You can innovate. And it just struck me when I was thinking about this. It seemed so strange. The other thing that seemed very strange was when I read through the ordinance, and I'm glad you put that in your memo, I found that there were all these exceptions. There were liquor and retail licenses. Then there was one for the Minot State Foundation. Then there was one for golf clubs. There were like 2 different kind of golf club licenses. I had no idea. Again, I'm not much of a bar person, but there were like a dozen plus exceptions. So it's not like there are 14 licenses. There are 14, but then there are 20 of these other kinds. It was a very eye-opening experience for me to read that ordinance. And there was an exception for just about everything. I think veterans, there was a hunting exception. You can have a hunting club, I think, with a license. There was a separate category. So it was like, whoa. That was really an eye-opening experience, and that kind of led me to the more eye-opening questions I'm asking now. So if you could come up with some, if somebody's come up with some potential ideas, that would be very helpful to me. Thank you, I appreciate that. That's what I was kind of figuring, and I really appreciate that, and your expertise, Mayor, having been on that committee in 2016. That's something that was not on my radar, but is now.
Alderman Patagula, one of the recommendations that came out of 16 and also came out of the discussions, I think, in Williston when they had theirs, was to simply purchase the licenses back and then take the cap off. That value was a little bit larger than any one of us that in 16 wanted to entertain.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Pittner.
Thank you, Mayor. I agree with Alderman Padragula. There's a lot of questions that are raised by issuing new licenses as is currently constructed. Kelly, can you answer when the last time, I know it came up the last meeting, exactly when the last time the city issued licenses, like as is proposed versus having them already spoken for through annexation?
Mr. Mayor and Alderman Pittner, before we sent the ordinance change through last meeting, Kelly Metelka checked and she couldn't find a time where the city had ever bid or auctioned liquor licenses.
Okay, thank you. And my reason being is the last time we did this was probably before I was born. It's the last time we looked into this process and really vetted it out and really talked about it in depth. I would actually prefer, and I don't know if I can provide an amendment motion or a substitute motion.
Mr. Mayor, I did want to clarify the motion was to adopt the policy. There wasn't a specific one suggested to be adopted. It was just to consider a number of different processes. There's some attached proposed forms if you want to move forward doing all 4 right away, but there were a few different alternatives.
Thank you for the clarification on that. I'm just going to zip back
motion.
on here and take a look.
So I guess clarification, are we instructing staff to put these up for bid with this motion?
I think the motion would need clarification so we know how to do that. Because right now, there are just some proposed specifications and that would have all 4 to be issued for bid. There are some blanks that need to be filled in though. If we want to do that right now, making sure that that value of the minimum bid is what the council wants, so you could do it all four at once, and we could issue that advertisement right away, if that's what the council wants. I just want to make sure that that's the direction that the motion maker is wanting.
Mr. Mayor, that was my intention, is to go through and do it all at once.
Okay. Look to the second for
Yes.
clarification on that. Yes. Alderwoman Evans.
I'd like to actually, following up on Alderman Pittner, I mean, I think there's more questions than answers at this point, and it's always a good idea to revisit things. So I'd like to make a substitute motion to adopt alternative 3 offered by the city clerk, which is establishing a committee to discuss the issuance of the additional licenses and ask them to develop a recommendation. I think, you know, I'm in support of this, but I just think a lot of time has lapsed since this has been discussed, and you know, this is important stuff, and I'd like to see a committee put their heads together and come back with a recommendation for us. So that would be my substitute motion that I'm looking for a second.
I'll second.
I'm going to look to our city manager or city attorney. I don't think we can have a substitute motion on this, but clarification.
Mr. Mayor, I guess unless Alderwoman Evans wants to table this and establish a committee, otherwise I think the original motion maker would have to withdraw a motion.
No, we can vote on both, the substitute and the main motion. You can vote on a substitute motion.
Sorry, I don't have my Robert's rules in front of me, but
I do.
You do, okay.
Yeah, well, you can look it up. You can vote on a substitute motion.
The battle of the lawyers.
If I may, Mayor, while you look that up.
Alderman Pittner.
Thank you. The reason I want to take a look at this is that, again, this is a great memo that's been proposed by staff that have reviewed it, and I think this is a good process. But again, we have an economic development specialist, we have a community development department. I think getting everyone in the room and really talking about this process and talking about how we make these licenses, these new licenses, and perhaps existing licenses, like Alderman Padragula had kind of brought light to, making sure that they're working for us and working for the city. If we're going to cap something and we're going to limit businesses, we got to make sure that it's used to its full potential. I'll cite, again, I cited it at the last meeting, we had a liquor license that was held by a vendor, weren't in business for almost a year. They were about to be have their license taken away or revoked, and they opened for a handful of days at the end of the year, and then their timeline reset. There's holes in our process. There's holes in our system. There are shortfalls. Let's just take a look. Let's just take a look, and maybe we get back to the same spot we're at. I think setting a timeline to have a committee review this and bring us something at the second meeting in December or the first meeting in January is very reasonable, and I don't think it belabors this process. Again, that's what I'm in favor of. That's to fully vet this process out versus just saying, this is what we've done in the past, let's just keep doing it. And by the past, I mean, again, before I was born. I think now is a good time to look at it.
Thanks for reminding us.
I think there is a motion that takes precedent that's referring it to a committee, but we don't currently, that's in our ordinance. And that would take precedent.
As I'm reading through the subsidiary on the motions, so essentially this would not prevent the original motion from taking place. It essentially just does push it into the future from having the final vote on whether or not it would have validation. So in this, because it is not replacing, it is only delaying what would be the inevitable vote on here, it would work for a substitute motion.
So it would be
Vote on the substitute motion, and if it passes, then it does away with the main motion.
On this one, only because it's not negating the original motion
Right, and
from
if it
being
fails,
voted on.
then the main motion comes back to the table for a vote.
Okay.
So the substitute motion is?
To adopt recommendation number 3 by the city clerk, which is the council could establish a committee to discuss the issuance of the additional licenses and ask them to develop a recommendation. So the substitute motion is to establish a committee to discuss the issuance of the additional licenses and ask that committee to develop a recommendation to bring back to the full council.
And the second was Alderman Pittner on that? So the discussion then falls to the substitute motion. Actually, we can, without digging into my manual, discussion on the substitute motion. Alderman Pittner.
Again, I'll just reiterate that I'm not asking for, maybe we get back to the staff recommendation that the primary motion, maybe we get back there and we come back to the meeting and I'll say the beginning of the year and we're right back to where we started and we say, hey, we couldn't come up with a better idea. But I think just having the discussion is something that is prudent and it's should be, for me, it's the best course of action to at least form a committee, discuss this, community partners, we have city staff, and really look at these assets that we have at our disposal.
Alderman Patagula?
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, and I guess my understanding of the motion is that the committee would also look a little bit more broadly at this whole issue of, why are we in this business, and, is it for, or should there be any limit at all? I guess one of the points that I want to compliment Paul on is this, bringing up this notion of consistency. I'd love nothing better than to have, 4 licenses auctioned off at 150 grand each. That would buy a lot of police cars. That would give us a lot of people we need in public safety, which is what I'm very interested in, or economic development, or wherever. I'd love that to happen. It'd be nice to have $1 million or whatever. But again, the issue is, if we want to be a progressive community, if we want to encourage economic development and entrepreneurship, why are we limiting something? Why are we limiting one kind of business versus all other kinds of businesses? That seems very strange to me, and I need to have a better justification for doing that. And like you were saying, Paul, there are some potential opportunities here. I can see reasonable limitations. I sort of like we have with adult establishments. I don't want one in my neighborhood. I don't want one across the street from a school. I think there are reasonable limits you could have, but it just strikes me as being rather odd. The other thing, in terms of consistency, this is maybe more so toward consistency, is I've always said that fees, and I think many of us feel the same way, that fees should pay for the services. If you want to build a garage, your building fee should be enough to pay for the inspection of it, et cetera, et cetera. It shouldn't be a way for the city to profit. And I think that's a problem if we look at this as a way of generating income for the city. I don't think that's fair. I think it's fair to pay for the cost of investigations for an applicant for a license. I think it's very fair to pay for increased law enforcement, which is a substantial amount. But as a revenue-generating source, I really have qualms the more I think about it, of using licenses as a revenue-generating source for the city. They should pay the cost of the service, but beyond that, that becomes difficult for me to support and argue. So I think Paul's notion and Carrie's notion of taking some time and taking another look at this, and again, maybe we'll come up with the same solution, but the constitution of the council has changed significantly, and I think times have changed significantly, and I think it's time to take a look at it. So I would support the motion to step back and take a look at it.
Alderwoman Olsen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So you've referenced 2016 a couple of times, and I was around during 2016 and sat through those meetings. I did not sit on the committee at that time. However, is the committee that we are suggesting now, is it a committee of our council members, or it's a broader committee, just so that there's clarification there?
Likely, Alderwoman Olsen, I would strongly recommend and it would be an appointed committee on this one, because it would be necessary for all of the documentation on here, because I can tell you, if this does pass, there is going to be a lot of discussion, as it was in 2016. And I would strongly recommend two of the council then get together with the Bar Owners Association here in town, and that includes all of the existing license holders, to start that discussion, and then also review everything that has been talked about between the different municipalities within North Dakota, and maybe even a little more broad on how that's been handled, and also tying in legal on this. I do recall in 2016, it was quite, for reference, quite taxing to our city attorney, and I can't remember if we only had one at that point, because there was a significant amount of detail that had gone into on some of the proposed changes, as well as our police department. So that is kind of the initial avenue I would recommend on an appointment. Alderwoman Evans.
So I just want to clarify, that's not my motion, is to open this up to a larger discussion. I mean, I would not be opposed, but like what we have before us is asking the committee to develop a recommendation on these 4 licenses. If we're going to, the process, are we going to amend the minimum bid requirements? Are we going to amend the operation transferability requirements? Are we going to bid all the 4 licenses at one time? Are we going to stagger those? So my intention was sticking to the issue at hand, which is about these 4 licenses. And if a larger discussion and a revisiting of the 2016 issues needs to happen, that's not what my motion is proposing to do. It is just these 4 licenses and how we want to go about the process with them. Because I don't think.
I'd look to the second for agreements.
I agree.
Okay.
Not to say, Alderman Padragula, all those things you brought up are not worthy of discussion, but like that is not going to be a by December 1st kind of, thing. So, if that's something, we want that ordinance revisited or something, we can pursue that, but the motion really is just for these 4 licenses.
Mr. Mayor.
Alderman Pittner.
Thank you. And I think part of this conversation, because again, I'm trying to just go down the rabbit hole for a second here. Let's just say we decide that there is a bigger issue at hand.
Right.
And we decide not to issue these 4 additional licenses because we need to deal with that issue from 2016 first. Maybe that's what comes of these meetings, because why would we issue 4 more licenses that we would potentially, I'm not saying we would, but buy back or have to figure out how to compensate or how to rectify a situation? Why would we add 4 more individuals, 4 more entities out there with licenses that we'd have to figure out how to fix a problem? The problems that you suggested.
Alderman Padragula.
I'm willing to support that. That's the sausage making, if you will. That's fine. But to me, that's really critical. And I have no problems with using that as a first step to looking at this issue. If we're, 4, we have 28 now, increasing it by 4, that's a pretty significant chunk. So I think inevitably that broader issue will come up. I'm not going to force it. I'm not going to push it. But as long as it's implicit in that motion, in that committee's work, that we're going to be taking a little bit broader perspective. We're going to focus on the 4, but inherently as part of that, we're going to have to look at the broader issue to some extent. I'm fine with that. I'll support that then.
Yeah, and that's exactly, like, we're not going to tell the committee what recommendation, but the recommendation could come back and say, this whole process sucks and you guys need to redo your ordinance, right? And that's the recommendation. But whatever it is, but I trust that the appointees to the committee, will take into consideration, right, if it's broken, right? They're not going to come back and say, well, it's broken, but let's do these 4 this way.
I'm okay with that.
So briefly, I'm not going to support the substitute motion. Going through what I do know in 16 and what has transpired since that time. I'm also aware that there are some businesses that are looking for liquor licenses and have the opportunity here and not wanting to hold them back either. I understand the want and the need to take a look at some of the other aspects and not to repeat history that has been done really in the real near past. My intent through 2016, looking at the number of liquor licenses in Grand Forks, is the market did decide how many licenses could be sustainable within that business model, and it wasn't that much different than what we already had on the books. Introducing 4 more of those licenses, I don't want to say dilutes the liquidity of those licenses, but in fact it does do that. It creates more of an opportunity to essentially pop that cap either in the very near future or in the not too distant future, because there's only so many businesses that can be sustainable, I think, in this community or in any community, given its size and number of establishments for that type. So I'm not going to support the substitute motion, but Alderman Ross.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I tend to agree with you, Mr. Mayor. I've been listening to the debate on both sides here, and the things I hear from the current liquor license holders is, there's so many loopholes. I mean, you could set up, one told me, you can set up a barbecue grill and grill hamburgers and get a supper club license, you know, and that's a full liquor license. You know, I'm just not going to vote for something that is going to penalize 28 business owners in Minot that have invested serious dollars into their business. I'm just not, and I know you're going to say, Alderman Pittner or Councilwoman Evans, you're going to say that it's probably not going to come back, or look, we've got 4. We've got 4 that we can approve and get out on the street today. And then if we want to change a liquor license or a liquor ordinance, let's do that. But right now, I mean, I'm all for protecting the businesses that have already invested in the city of Minot and have invested in the city of Minot by a number of ways. I can't support it. Thank you.
Further discussion on the substitute motion? Final call for discussion on the substitute motion. Motion is to send to the committee for the consideration of the recommendations. This is option 3. Please call the roll.
Evans?
Yes.
Janser?
Oh, Mark's trying to speak, he said.
Oh, I'm sorry. Mark, I'm going to make an exception because you are on the phone. Mark. Alderman Janser.
Mr. Mayor.
Can we turn up the audio, please? Alderman, hold on for a moment. Okay, go ahead, sir.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Mayor, I'd like a clarification of the motion. Who is going to appoint this committee? Is it the city council? Is it you, sir? What is the motion?
Thank you for that question of clarification. I would look to the motion maker.
I believe the city ordinances and charters say the mayor gets to make those appointments, so we'd have to follow current law, which is the mayoral appointments. You know, I imagine you would do like any other appointments. You don't even bring committee, no, so it's the mayor's purview. So whoever he would appoint to that committee, you know, I'd have confidence and faith that, you know, those are the right people on the committee.
It would likely be, Alderman Janser, it would likely be 3 of the council members so that we don't have a quorum, and potentially a couple of community liaison members that also have some standing in the community within their own liquor licenses.
Thank you.
Any further questions or clarifications before we go back to the question?
And could someone please read that? I don't have a computer, so I don't know which alternative 4 is. If someone could please clarify that. Or alternative 3, whatever it is,
Back
option
to
3.
my screen here, just one moment. Unless you have it, please.
The council could establish a committee to discuss the issuance of the additional licenses and ask them to develop a recommendation.
Thank you.
We're back in the clarification. Let's call roll again, please.
Evans?
Yes.
Janser?
No.
Olson?
No.
Pittner?
Yes.
Pajagula?
Yes.
Ross?
No.
Sitma?
No. Motion fails. Back to the original motion. Discussion on the motion to approve on all 4 of the undersigned recommendations. Alderman Pittner.
I won't support this original motion again. This is a process that has not been looked at for decades, if ever. And again, I don't believe a government should regulate the amount of businesses. I believe that's the responsibility of the market. That may be a philosophical difference, but I won't support this. And I think there can be alternatives, even to just the new additional licenses, to make sure that we have a better process in place, because right now we don't.
Other discussion. Alderwoman Olson.
I'll just add, Mr. Mayor, that after 2016, we really did follow the recommendations of the liquor establishment owners. We, you know, and it took hours and several meetings to get to that point. I do remember that. But they did speak and we did listen. And that's why we have the situation that we do now. And I think that we are still honoring what their requests had been.
Alderman Patagula.
I think it's important to have an inclusive governing process, but two things have come up tonight that make me wonder about that. One was in the discussion of Visit Minot. It was said that the purpose of the organization was to basically enhance the functioning of the hospitality industry. Now it seems like the function of this ordinance is to improve the functioning and economic viability of the liquor industry. I think we have to think broader than that. I think we have to look at what's best for the community. I see Visiting Minot as having a much, much bigger agenda and much bigger role than just putting money in the pockets of the people who own hotels and restaurants. I see this liquor licensing also doing much more than putting money in the pockets of people who own 28 businesses. I think we need to take a broader look at this. I think it again opens up some opportunities for entrepreneurship, and I think again the issue of consistency. You know, if we really believe in a free market, we need to support a free market, even though it may be painful. And it may upset some people who are part of the market now and might not welcome the market being broadened. So I'm going to oppose this.
Alderman Pittner, one more time.
Just clarification. To comment from Alderwoman Olson, the fact that we listened to the 28 retail liquor license holders and we listened to them and we put their needs and desires and wants and benefit over the entire community is, to me, the crux of this issue. Yeah.
Further discussion. Motion is to approve with all of the recommendations. Please call the roll.
Ross,
Yes.
Sitma,
Yes.
Evans,
No.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson,
Yes.
Pittner,
No.
Pajagula.
No.
Motion passes. That takes us to the next item on our agenda, and I've got to go back to my agenda here. We are on to 8.5. This is donate the thermal imager to the Glenburn Fire Department. Glenburn Fire Department has had a fire in the station that totaled almost all of the equipment and vehicles that were present. With this large dollar amount loss, they cannot replace all of the equipment in a timely manner and still provide quality services. Monmouth Fire Department has an out-of-date thermal imager that is still functional, but the technology and imaging is poor compared to the newer versions. The unit has not been in service for years and was removed from a vehicle that is no longer in service. Minot Fire Department could fill a need by donating it to the Glenburn Fire Department. The recommendation to the council is to approve this request to donate a thermal imager to aid in the mission of Glenburn's Fire Department in their time of need.
So moved.
Motion by Alderman Pittner to approve, second by Alderwoman Evans. Discussion. Any discussion? Final call for discussion. Seeing and hearing none, motion is to approve. Please call the roll.
Pittner,
Yes.
Pajagula,
Yes.
Ross,
Yes.
Sitma,
Yes.
Evans,
Yes.
Janser,
Yes.
Olson.
Yes.
Motion is approved. That takes us to 8.6, the retail beer and wine license from Up Your Axe. The city received a request from Up Your Axes for a retail beer and wine license operating on 21 East Central Avenue, Suite 102. All documentation has been submitted and inspections relating to their proposed premise have been approved by the police chief, building official, and fire marshal. This was a late addition to the agenda, and I do believe that you do have hard copies in front of you from the different recommendations and agenda item.
Move approval.
Motion by Alderwoman Olson to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderman Ross. Mr. City Manager.
Yeah, just One, I want to be on the record that I'm supportive of this moving forward with the staff recommendations, but I did want to talk a little bit about process as far as timing for when an item is put on the agenda or not. As you're aware, this was added just a couple hours prior. So last week when we were preparing the agenda and the council packet, this was not ready to go. There was some consternation by the business owner that they wanted it on the agenda this evening. And I had held to the course that it was not ready. We have deadlines and process in place for a reason, because we want you as a council to be educated, that you have the material before you, that you have time to review that. The public has an opportunity to see that and determine whether or not they want to come speak for, against, or neutral on the issue and those types of things. And while this would normally be handled under consent agenda, again, this is past inspections. It was inspected this morning. It has the necessary review by staff at this point to proceed forward and be considered for approval by the council. But there are other items that sometimes are not ready to be put on agenda that we leave off. And so it puts my office and my staff in a difficult position as far as determining when we choose to be friendly and put it on the agenda at the last minute versus when do we hold the line to the process and the deadlines because it's not ready at the time of preparing of the packet and the agenda. So I just wanted to state that point publicly, that probably deserves some more discussion and consideration. Right now, current policy is if it is not submitted to staff by Wednesday morning preceding the council meeting, it typically does not go on the agenda. Since I've been here, I've provided some flexibility that if that information comes in as we're preparing the packet and it has not been out, then we'll allow that to be on unless there's some extenuating emergency circumstance that would subject a last minute change. But typically we try to keep that agenda the same as possible and those types of things. But anyway, I'm not in opposition of this being approved by the council of issuing a license, although we just had a lengthy conversation about alcohol licenses, and here's another one. But I had concern with regards to the process. We had a couple other items that wanted to be on the agenda tonight that we're still trying to make it on the agenda as of this morning, and we didn't treat them all equally in the same. Although this one was requested to be on the agenda by Alderman Pittner, which is the distinct difference on this agenda item versus the other ones that were declined.
Relating to this item, and perhaps we might be able to discuss this briefly in our miscellaneous and discussion items as a possible motion. Many of these come to council for essential a rubber stamp. I don't know if we've ever actually denied once they've met all the requirements for occupancy. In these circumstances, I think it would be beneficial for us to have a brief conversation coming up here in miscellaneous to direct staff to perhaps draft an ordinance change that would amend the administrative approval for such items rather than coming to us for a rubber stamp. So those are my comments on here. Alderman Pittner.
Thank you, Mayor, and I would second those comments, and when we get to the appropriate section of the agenda, I would fully support that. And again, I apologize for putting any staff or city staff in a compromising position by getting this in last minute. I was reached out by the business owner today to get this on the agenda in order to open their business possibly this weekend. I understand we have deadlines, and I respect that. I'm trying to be receptive and agile in this position and what we have when this is coming to us for a rubber stamp and for administrative approval. So again, I told the business owner I would do my due diligence to try to get this on the agenda for them so that they can get their small business up and running. I understand myself how a small business operates and the necessity of cash flow. So again, I agree that we have deadlines and we should stick to them as much as we possibly can. This was, I believe, in my opinion, just a spot where we could be receptive to a business owner and encourage small business and entrepreneurship in our community, and that's why I asked and felt comfortable having it on the agenda, and I hope that it spurs conversation and maybe improvements to our system, just like the mayor stated. So.
Further discussion on the motion, Alderman Patagula.
I look forward to the more extensive discussion, but at this point I wanted to compliment Harold for being very honest about this and being very transparent about the rush job. I can't remember us talking about this before, and I think it's an important thing that we do talk about, and I appreciate your candor, and your candor too, Paul.
Alderwoman Evans.
So I will support this, but I would like I know October 4th agenda is getting full, but maybe the next meeting in October, really listening to Mr. Stewart's, thing and giving him, I'd like for us to be following the same rules with everyone, right? So he is not having to determine, if there's other people who didn't get on the agenda today, just, that's not okay, right? And we're letting this on. So I will support it, but we'll be putting on the agenda a discussion and talking to our city attorney about what, if that's just a administrative policy, how we go about doing that, so that you and your staff don't have to exercise this discretion, which is difficult, right? That there's a hard and fast rule, and it's either followed, if there's exceptions, what those exceptions are, so that you're not put in this situation again, so.
Further discussion on this motion? Final call for discussion. Seeing none, the motion is to approve. Please call the roll.
Olson,
Yes.
Hittner,
Yes.
Pajagula,
Yes.
Ross,
Yes.
Sitma,
Yes.
Evans,
Yes.
Janser,
Yes.
Motion is approved. That wraps up the Section 8 for action items. Takes us to Section 9. This is personal appearances. This is an opportunity for anyone to come forward who may want to speak on any item that is or is not on our agenda. I would ask if you do come forward just to state your name and city of residence. One more time for personal appearances. That takes us to the miscellaneous and discussion items. I would look to Mr. City Manager here and offer a recommendation to staff to take a look at reworking of our ordinance that requires action for items such as the previous item we just voted on for occupancy and or approvals after meeting all requirements, that it be drafted to reflect administrative approval rather than city council approval, which should help in those circumstances of being a lot more business friendly. Specific to items that we can, I think, look at that don't require scratch that. Specific to items as long as they've met the requirements of the police chief and fire chief and all of the other requirements that are already sitting in ordinance. And that can be brought forward in a month's time, or I guess within a reasonable amount of time for consideration and discussion with the council. Alderman Ross.
Mr. Mayor, would that then move it, kind of put it in the same category as like a raffle permit type of thing, or would it move from an action item to a consent item? Is that, or would it be completely just, once administrative approval is complete, then it's done, the process is done?
Thank you, Alderman Ross, for clarification. Administrative approval, it would be done, perhaps with a caveat that is, it rejected, it could come for an appeal to the council. The same way that the taxi license that also oftentimes requires us to reject it anyway if it doesn't meet certain specifications. But Mr. City Manager, perhaps you have a little more to add.
Yeah, staff and I will try to review items that are in ordinance that may be processed faster with administrative approval. So in essence, what would happen is the council sets the ordinances, and as long as it meets that ordinance and complies with that the staff would have the administrative ability to approve those, as opposed to making these entities come to council, be on an agenda, and get approval, because we're just adding an additional step in the process. So we'll look through those and come up with a recommendation for council on areas that we can expedite those processes, and then council can decide whether those are things that you're comfortable leaving to administrative approval by staff as long as it meets ordinance, or whether you want to retain that additional check and balance of having it come to you for approval in open public meeting.
Alderwoman Evans.
I know at one point our city attorney and city manager were working on or thinking about ordinance amendments that would expand the city manager's administrative work to be able to sign some contracts. Can that be tied up in this thing? this what you're gonna, I mean, because that's also an administrative, sort of cleanup we've been talking about, that you have, shared with us that is a frustration on some part, and it does take up some of our, administrative time here at council. So I don't know, is that still something that is on the radar?
We can look at that as well. Again, typically, what I'm used to is as long as it's within the parameters of the budget the
Right.
council's approved, and we're issuing contracts to deliver those services as the council's approved through the budget process, typically the city manager has the authority to enter into contracts on behalf of the city.
Right.
That currently does not happen in Minot. So we can review that as well as far as a process efficiency that can come forward to a recommendation from staff to council for your consideration.
Great, I would like that. Thank you, Mr. Stewart.
Further discussion on this item, Alderman Bittner.
I just want to thank staff for making that a priority and for that recommendation to come from the mayor. Again, it was a conversation that city manager and I had earlier, and then ultimately me asking him to have the previous item on the agenda again. I'm sure the business owner is thankful. For me, I'm neutral either way. I'll sleep just fine because, again, there was a deadline that wasn't met. But if we can find efficiencies through this process and maybe making an exception, then I think that's a benefit that our community faces as a whole. So.
As there's no actionable items on this, I don't think we need a motion by any means, just directions. So unless there's anything else on this specific topic. Any other items under miscellaneous and discussion? Alderman Patagula.
Well, Carrie earlier raised the issue of deadlines, and I don't know if her comments were just directed toward, whether it's a perfunctory administrative matter, which I have no problems with, or if there was a larger issue of things, of there being deadlines and things skirting them somehow.
Alderwoman Evans.
So actually, I just sent an email to Mr. Stewart and Ms. Hendershot asking them for guidance on how city council will go about giving direction to the city manager about those deadlines, whether that's a policy or, whatever. So hopefully they will come back to us with what we have within our purview to be able to do. So Harold and his office know, like, hey, no exceptions,
So that'll be discussed.
Yes.
Okay, and they'll come back to us with some thoughts on that.
I believe so. That's what we've asked. So, yep. And then we'll, give what direction we can to Mr. Stewart and his staff.
Okay.
Yes, I made a note of the previous conversation that will be brought back to council in developing some sort of recommendation as far as a policy that provides more clarification as far as timelines, deadlines, and preparing council agendas, council packets, and when an agenda item is included on an agenda or postponed.
And as long as you're going to be doing that, I guess, as long as you're going to be doing that, thank you. I'd like you to revisit this form that is floating around somewhere about ways of submitting things for the agenda. I think it's fallen out of use now, but a while back we had a form where everybody had to fill out, and it really wasn't suitable, in my opinion, for aldermen to raise an issue. But if you could look at that, if there is some form or process, we might as well get this thing nailed down completely. And it's news to me that there was a deadline of Wednesday mornings. I thought it was like Thursday or something. So I think certainly the public needs to be informed. So I think that's an important step in this whole process. That's after we get our act together and we get a list of parameters that it'd be very clear to the public too.
And just for a little bit of clarification, I believe that deadline came shortly after the council reorganization in an attempt to give the elected and the public more time to go through the agendas rather than being delivered Fridays at 5 o'clock as they were once when they were printed out back in the day. And sufficient time to go through all of the detail as well as giving staff enough time for preparation ahead of the different council meetings as we move from one meeting a month to two. And then the form was created to help create some uniformity with the different submissions that came in, if it came from someone other than a council member or gave direction to council members. I don't think it was hard and fast, but more of a outline. Mr. City Manager.
I was just going to state that I don't know that it's a formal policy as much as an informal, but my understanding coming in as I've acclimated as city manager, we try to have council agenda and packets done and out the Thursday before council meeting. So council has adequate opportunity to review the packet and ask any questions in preparation for the meeting, et cetera. And so backing up from that and the amount of time it takes staff to prepare the packet, we have an internal policy that everything has to be in by Wednesday morning, preceding the council, so we can meet that goal and objective of having council agenda and packet out by Thursday afternoon.
And we'll look for that conversation when it comes back. Any other items for discussion today? Liaison reports. Alderman Patagula.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I have 4 items, one of which I will defer to Alderwoman Evans. The County Planning Commission, which almost got into maybe a fight would be too strong of an expression, but things almost took off. So I'll leave it to her to share that with you. The 3 items I do want to report on are, first of all, a meeting of the Emergency Resource Council, in which I'm very pleased to represent the council. We had a detailed briefing from Burlington Northern and the Santa Fe Railroad about their emergency operation plans and the improvements they're making in safety and security issues at the Gavin Yard. Very, very impressive proposal, very impressive summary of what they do to keep us safe. And that's a really, really neat group to serve on. County Planning Commission, I will defer to Carrie. The Commission on Aging met last Friday, and they are starting to go back into more normal functioning in terms of activities for senior citizens. The numbers participating are low. Much lower than they were before for obvious reasons. So I think that they're being very patient, and certainly their customers and clients are being patient and easing into group activities. It'll take a while to recover. There was also an interesting comment too historically. Bob Schemp sits on that board, and he used to be our former city manager. And one of the things we were ready to approve was a service contract on a new elevator. We were going to be paying a portion, 5% of the service contract. Elevator was going to be what, I don't know how many, it was a lot of money. And the service contract was going to be a lot. And nobody knew, because the terms hadn't been established yet, of what the contract was. So 5% of an unknown amount was what was being proposed. And Bob, to his credit, said, wait a second here, we can't do this. We can't agree to pay something, a certain percentage of something when we don't know what the overall cost is. And I was really impressed with that. That's the kind of ship Bob ran in the past, very tight and asked very, very interesting questions. He was there in a walker. He's elderly. He's frail in some ways. But his mind was sharp, and he was focusing on that issue of what's the accountability. We shouldn't be agreeing to something when we don't know how much it costs. And I was really proud of that. He carried on that spirit he showed here on the council. The last comment, this is the most exciting thing for me, is I'm representing the council on the Ecological Restoration Committee of the NDR grant. And we've seen some major movement. We will be having a next staff level meeting in November, I think November 16th. But we've had 2 organizations actually come into this process. One is the Minot State Science Program, and the other is the science program at the public schools, and by extension, any of the private high schools. We're looking at the idea of using maybe some of that land as an urban field station in the area of biological sciences and ecological sciences. And both of these organizations have been extremely interested. So they're going to be getting their act together, talking with their colleagues, seeing what their needs might be. And we're looking forward to making them part of the planning process and making education and ecological education a significant part of that. We have a river and we have a lot of land, and these are people who could use it and their students could use it. So this is going to be really, really exciting. So I'm very much looking forward to that. One of the service clubs in town, the Minot Rotary Club, has also purchased some canoes, which they very much wanted to put in the river, but couldn't. And they're going to be working with the park board to somehow have access to the river, and that's something also that'll be coming. So we're looking at much greater educational use of the river and recreational boating on it as things develop. So this is going to be, I think, really good. So thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Alderman Patagula. Alderwoman Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have lost count, I believe, on the number of meetings related to our new city hall. But it is very exciting, whether we are talking about chairs or rooms or mother's rooms or whatever it is, all the details that are coming together for our new city hall. So I've been pleased to be part of those discussions, and soon we will be going to bid and have that process starting. So it's exciting for me to be part of that, and I think it's exciting for our community to know that we have a new city hall coming.
We're also going to be closing on a building very soon on another topic, aren't we?
We are, yes, I believe, and I have not heard the exact time, but I believe October 1st, we should be taking, there should be an ownership change for our CTE building, and so hopefully that process can be moving at a much more rapid pace. So that I'll have more to report on that, but hopefully October 1st.
I know John's final walk out the door will be wanting to see the signature dry and progress moving. Thank you, Lisa. Alderwoman Evans.
So I should have mentioned this in miscellaneous, but I wanted to recognize Stefan, our traffic engineer. KX did a really great story last month on some assisted pedestrian signals we put up that at the request of a blind resident. And Stefan was very helpful in making that happen and always looking for ways to how the city can better serve our disabled residents. And so I thought you represented the city very well in that story. And thank you for your efforts always for the residents, in particular our most vulnerable ones. So, right. And your yellow vest looked great. Planning, Ward County planning is Ward County planning. Steve and I are just trying to keep below the bullets flying. They're having a major issue about this right-of-way taking, and it's going back and forth between the Ward County Commission and the Planning Commission, and emotions are very high. So we're just trying to, just be nice ambassadors. And we're still working on the zoning rewrite. It's coming along, so. Library, you'll probably notice there's a new improved website, minotlibrary.org, looking good. Ms. Anderson and her staff continue to tweak it, but please, if you haven't visited it recently, minotlibrary.org, go take a look. Summer reading 2021 is officially over. All of the numbers went up in all of the categories. Kids, teens, adults, all improved in their numbers. So we're very proud of Ms. Anderson and her staff for the work in getting our residents reading. So thank you. That's all I got.
Briefly on mine, serving on the Ward County Weed Board, we met this morning. Lots of spraying that took place over the summer amidst the drought, because as we all know, grass doesn't grow so well, weeds do. Did a tremendous amount of helicopter spraying to the tune of about $92,000 worth throughout the entire Ward County area, just from the helicopter, and then there were a lot of other areas, including through the river in Minot for everything from purple loosestrife and then trying to address leafy spurge among all the rest of the noxious weeds. That does continue until basically freeze up. Task Force 21, we are going to be headed out on Wednesday. Myself, Mark Janser, who also serves not as a not as a council appointment, but serves separately as our task force committee president. And then the city manager and myself are flying to Washington, D.C. for the Nuclear Triad conference that is kicking off on Friday. We're going to be meeting up with the commander of the Strategic Air Command and many other generals and current and former Air Force officials. So it is. Last year's conference was actually postponed because of COVID, so a lot of folks that are looking forward to that and continuing on with those relationships within our military personnel, past, present, and well, even some future likely. And if Mark wants to talk more about that, he certainly can. Just on the side of Chamber EDC, Chamber continues to work out its numbers as that relationship joined with, of course, the Monetary Development Corporation, but focusing on the revenue that is generated by both the DMV and other sources, and watching how the DOT has kind of changed some of the paradigm with the driver's licenses. So they're watching that very closely. And then there is soon to be a new tenant in our agribusiness park, and an announcement in the not too distant future. That is a guaranteed thing, so we'll be watching for that announcement very soon. Alderman Ross.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Zoning Ordinance Steering Committee, we met last week to finish up the final chapter, and we are meeting next Monday at 8 a.m. to review and approve the final draft of the subdivision ordinance.
All right.
That is my report.
Thank you, Alderman Ross. Alderman Janser,
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can you hear me okay?
we can hear you, sir.
Unfortunate.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, I guess the liaison committee hasn't met, so I don't have a report on that, but just to fill in a couple things with regard to Task Force 21. I'm here in Washington presently as a member of the U.S. Air Force Civic Leaders and the Air Force Association conference is going on. Our Civic Leaders group has some additional meetings that are scheduled, and tomorrow we'll be meeting with the commander of the operations for Air Force, and then on Wednesday we'll be meeting with the secretary, the chief of staff, and the undersecretary. So, real great opportunity to network with our top leadership in the Air Force. And then on Thursday, when the rest of the task force members arrive, we also will be meeting with our senators, Senator Hoeven and Senator Kramer. So doing work to try to make sure that we are able to retain our missions and the future at Minot Air Force Base. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Alderman Pittner.
Thank you, Mayor. The Renaissance Zone Review Board last week voted to approve the updated zone development plan. And a lot of good changes, a lot of good input from not only council members, but members of the board. And I think it's a great tool. So a lot of good work going on there. And obviously, Visit Minot. Got a good look into what we're working on over there tonight from the presentation from Steph. So that's my report.
Thank you, Alderman Pittner. And that is the end of our reports, and that leaves us to just one final item on our agenda. And that is adjournment.
So moved.
Motion by Alderman Pittner. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderman Ross. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. We're adjourned.